Welcome to ZMail 2020. We are moving base to Singapore now to join Anjali Sharma, who serves as the Managing Director for Narrative Singapore. Anjali will share her thoughts on how storytelling is set to change in the future.
All right, quick reminder that if you'd like to reach us on social media, use the hashtag ZMelt or reach us at @Curious on Twitter. With that, it's time for me to welcome Anjali Sharma, Managing Director of Narrative. And Anjali is going to talk to us about storytelling in the post-COVID world. Anjali, all yours.
Thank you, Suresh. So, hello, everyone, from wherever you're dialing in. I'm a story practitioner. I tell stories, but I have kind of an unusual task for the next 30 minutes. As much as I want to tell you stories, and I will tell you stories, I also have to make sure that at no point any one of you who's listening to me gets to a stage and says, Anjali ji, kahani mat batao, please get to the point. So those of you who don't understand Hindi, what I just said was that I have a tough task to ensure that despite telling stories, none of you get to a stage where you say, oh my God, why is she telling tales and why is she not getting to the point? So let me start off by saying this is about storytelling, but not the kind of storytelling that makes you say, get to the point. The kind of storytelling that makes you say, ah, I got the point. There is a difference. The difference between how we tell stories for change in an organizational setting and how we tell stories purely for entertainment. I mean, there's nothing wrong with telling stories for purely for entertainment. I'm a self-confessed Bollywood bhakt who has a song and a dance ready for every occasion, but that for another time, that kind of storytelling, maybe some other time. Today, we are going to talk about organizational storytelling. So I want to start off today by taking you to the year 1994. In 1994, a gentleman by the name of Thomas Higbee worked at Next. Next was an organization founded by Steve Jobs. And there was this day when Thomas and a couple of his colleagues were sitting in a break room. So maybe they were having their lunch, but they were sitting in a break room. And as they were sitting there, Steve Jobs walked in and he started making a bagel for himself. So these guys are sitting in one corner talking. Steve Jobs is making a bagel. And then he turns around and asks them all suddenly out of the blue, who is the most powerful person on the planet? So Thomas says that he had just witnessed and seen Nelson Mandela speak, so he was really impressed. So he just said, oh, Nelson Mandela is the most important person on this planet, most powerful person on this planet. Steve Jobs, in his super uber confident style, turned around and said, no, you are all wrong. The most powerful person on the planet is a storyteller. He or she sets the vision, the value, and an agenda for an entire generation to come. And then he further on goes to say that I am just so tired that Disney has a monopoly on storytelling. At this point, Thomas is thinking to himself, there is a very fine line between a genius and a local. And I think I'm witnessing a local right now. But Steve Jobs that day walked out of the break room and surely did become one of the best storytellers we have ever seen. So if we believe in any change that Steve Jobs has brought to this world, then I think we need to believe that a storyteller is the most powerful person on this planet. So if you want to contend with the idea of becoming a storyteller who can change themselves and the organizations that they work in, then I want to invite you to take this short journey with me over the next 30 minutes, in which I want to be able to get you on a path where you will feel like not only have I got the will, but also the skill to be a storyteller. So let's just get started. I have designed this journey into milestones, and every milestone I'll show you on a camera like this. So the very first milestone is storytellers don't respond. That's the number one thing I want you to remember. Now, just before you start going, what does she mean? They don't respond. Just let me explain. So COVID-19 hits, all organizational leaders start to respond. Let's go to 5th of May, 2020. Brian Chesky, the CEO of Airbnb, announces that 25% of their staff is going to have to leave Airbnb. In August, CEO of LinkedIn, Ryan Rosinski, announces that they're not immune to the impact of the crisis, and 960 people from LinkedIn are going to have to leave. Many other companies made very similar announcements. They're all responding, but storytellers don't respond. Earlier on in the crisis, somewhere in March this year, CEO and president of Marriott International Hotels, Arna Sorensen, showed up on a 5-minute video looking frail, bald because he's being treated for pancreatic cancer at this stage, telling his employees of Marriott International Hotel, the impact of COVID-19 on them. Was he responding to? In fact, no. He was telling a story. He was connecting. And why is it that when you look at all these leaders' way of responding, each one of them is giving a bad news? I mean, this is the time for bad news. But why is it that Arna Sorensen gets so much love and admiration for the connection he makes and not just the response he provides to his people? So I want to read out some of the comments that he received in a public platform for the way he told the story and the way he made the connection. Take note, politicians, this is what real leadership looks like. A comment in a public domain for him. What a lovely man, real leadership in the face of adversity. I literally could feel his compassion and empathy. And some of you sitting over there right now are thinking, all well and good to put commentary like that on a public platform when you're not facing the troubles that the Marriott International Hotel employees are going to face. Hang on a minute. Here's some commentary from Marriott Associates. I've been a Marriott Associate for 10 years. Love you, Anna. We're going to get through this together. Now, it's not just people who don't work for that brand. Even people who who do work for that brand had huge amount of love and admiration. So what did he do? He followed a principle that Dr. Brene Brown introduced us to. Rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is a connection. And my assertion today is that that connection is often in the story you tell. So please remember that the first milestone to becoming a storyteller is to get rid of this habit or this will to want to just respond in situations. Try to connect. Now, if you feel like you're with me and you feel like, yes, storyteller is the most powerful person, maybe, and yes, I get it that they don't respond, they make a connection through story. Maybe the next question you have in your mind is, how do these people tell the story? What do they do? And for that, I'm going to turn to my second milestone. My second milestone for today is storytellers show up. What do I mean by storytellers show up? So if we were to reverse the chapters of history and listen to a speech Martin Luther King gave, which was, I have a dream. I'm going to emphasize on this. He gave a speech, I have a dream. He did not write a strategy on I have a dream. He used the power of his voice to create a new agenda, create a new vision, and set new values for an entire generation to come. Storytellers show up, especially in a crisis situation. They show up and they use the power of their voice. Why does the power of voice works better than the written form of storytelling? Because we think through our eyes and we feel through our ears, said Malcolm Gladwell, a world-renowned thought leader and an author. What does he mean? If you tell a story in writing, most likely your proposition to the receiver is think. But if you tell the story with your voice, most likely, actually not most likely, definitely, your proposition to the receiver is feel. And in a crisis situation, we feel more than we think. I mean, if that was not the case, then why earlier on in the crisis we saw some really irrational behavior from people, like, panic buying, toilet paper running out, all around the world. There's no logical reason to be like that. It's all irrational. And in a crisis situation, we have to use the power of our voice. You have to, as a storyteller, show up and be present in front of people. If this doesn't convince you, then think about this. Why are innovations like Alexa and Siri on the rise? Why is podcasting on the rise? Because in a digitally accelerated world, we are craving human connection. We're craving a natural language. We are sick and tired of corporate speak. And there is nothing more natural than using your voice and telling a story. Now, you believe a storyteller is the most powerful person, I hope. You believe that, storytellers don't just respond, they connect. You believe that there's power in voice. Maybe now you are thinking, I am so time poor. How can I learn how to tell a story? Please believe that I'm not going to ask you to tell a story like, like Clint Eastwood does, or tell a story like Sanjay Leela Bansali does. That is a very different form of storytelling. We, in a time poor corporate world, need to be able to learn into tapping the power of small moments and tell a story. Now, for that, I'm going to turn to my milestone number 3, which is storytellers tap the power of small stories in an organization. What do I mean by that? What they do is they zoom into moments and they use those small moments to create a big impact. Let me give you an example. Because this conference is being held out of India, I will pick an Indian leader who's done us proud in the world. I'm going to talk about Satya Nadella. So Satya Nadella is the 3rd CEO of Microsoft. When he took over Microsoft, he realized that one of the most important things for him is going to be to get his very technically inclined and very tech savvy and very, all things, speeds and feeds and algorithm type of mindset team to start thinking about empathy. Now, like most leaders, he could have gone and given people reasons why we need to be more empathetic towards our customer. He could have given more knowledge around what empathy is, or he could have explained the benefits of being empathetic. He did none of that. What he did instead was to write a book, and in which the book was called Hit Refresh. And in that book, 75 times he mentions the word empathy, but he also uses small stories to bring this empathy to life. And here's one of the story he tells. He says this was around the time when I was being interviewed to join Microsoft. An up and coming manager at that time, Richard, interviewed me. And when I was sitting in the interview, Richard asked me, no technical question, nothing about my experience in other technical fields, other organizations. He asked me a question. So Satya, if you see on the roadside next to a dustbin, a baby crying, what are you going to do? And Satya's response to him was, I will call 911. So Richard didn't say anything to that. He continued the interview. And when the interview finished, and Richard was walking Satya out, he put his arm around Satya and he said to him that you will first pick up the baby and make sure the baby is not crying, and then you will call 911, Satya. That is what empathy looks like. He uses a small moment to make people understand empathy, not give them knowledge about empathy. So I want to emphasize that small stories create an understanding. We rely way too much on providing knowledge, reasons, benefits to be able to explain what we are trying to explain in an organizational setting. Now, how are these small moments put together? What are some of the things that go into it to make it an effective storytelling in an organizational setting? So I'll give you some of the things that are important when you are telling a story to make a point in a business setting. So most corporate stories will start off either with a time or a time marker, calendar marker, or a globe marker. Time marker sort of sounds like just the other day. Calendar marker sounds like September 1999. And globe marker is in India. Or it could also be just a setting when I was being interviewed to join Microsoft. Uh, Small stories also have people in them. Mostly in oral small stories, we have two people. What we've learned is that if you have anything more than two people, you tend to confuse the listener. These two people would usually have a conversation between them. There is a word of emotion that I felt stressed. I felt, it was disappointing. Now, a lot of people think that when I advocate putting a word of emotion in an organizational setting, what I'm telling you is to display emotion. I'm absolutely not telling you to display emotion because that's not the role you have in a corporate setting. What I'm telling you to do is to describe an emotion. There's a fundamental difference between describing an emotion and displaying an emotion. Stories have activation of visualization. They take you someplace, and you don't have to show a PowerPoint, or you don't have to show an image. You just have to talk about a setting that people know. So I was being interviewed. Now, when I say something like that, it automatically takes you into that setting. And when you are in that setting, you're in the story, experiencing the moment for yourself. Stories have series of events, and then something breaks those series of events. Something unexpected happens. But most importantly, stories have, in a business setting, have a point that you want to make. In this case, the importance of empathy was the point that Satya Nadella wanted to make. So those are some of the elements that go into creating a small story in an organizational setting. So if you are from an organization, and if you are post COVID-19 wanting to tell the forward story, you are going to have to tap into the power of small moments, small stories, to be able to make good points to your employees, to move them into the right direction. Please rescue yourself from the responsibility of giving people reasons, knowledge, benefits to be able to make a change happen. Tap into the power of small stories. So how far have we come now? We've said that storyteller is the most powerful person on this planet. We then said that storytellers don't respond, they create a connection, and quite often that connection is created through a story they tell. Then we went into saying storytellers show up and use the power of their voice. In today's day and age where everything is a chaos and there's so much uncertainty, what we have to remember is natural, authentic, speaking like a human is very, very important. And using the power of your voice is very, very important. We then looked into, how do you structure a small story? How do you put a small story together to make business points and never feel like we're asking you to be a Hollywood director or be a script writer and things like that? That's not what organizational storytellers do at all. Now, I would be a big liar if I said to you, tapping into a small moment is good enough to be able to tell a story to set an agenda for the next generation. I think that's a huge lie. That's not correct. Wherein small stories do give you an ability to be able to make a point, they're not enough to be able to set an agenda to move forward. For that, you need a narrative. You need an agenda, a story called a forward story that takes people into the forward direction. And if it changes and it evolves because there's so much uncertainty, then you just have to evolve your story along with it. For that, I'm going to turn to my fourth and final milestone for today. My final milestone today is to tell you what is a forward story and how do you go about creating a forward story. So I'm going to adopt the posture of a teacher for a little bit now, because I want to teach you how to build a forward story. sure some of you can actually sit down with your teams and maybe come up with something that sounds like a forward story that tells you how do you communicate the forward strategy. But why don't we use the knowledge that I have gained over the years of working with organizations and the best practices around the world and learn a very strategic structure that has proved itself over and over again to make a change happen in an organizational setting. So if you're with me, let's get started. I'm going to share these 5 circles with you one by one. So I think you can see that clearly. So let me talk to you about the very first circle. So how do you begin? How do you begin? So the first circle is all about you have to start with how things have changed from how they used to be. You have to talk about the COVID-19 impact in your organization, and just saying we were a great business doing really well, and now because of COVID-19 we're not doing well is not enough. You're going to have to insert small moments. You're going to have to say things like, remember last year when we did our financial plan or our business plan, we looked at the growth we had had in 2019, and we were so confident that we could push this 20% up and get the organization to a completely different level. When the year started, we were all singing the song of growth, and then suddenly everything slipped off. And today, as we sit here, leave aside growth, don't even talk about growth. If we can just keep ourselves afloat, that would be enough. So it's important to put examples, take them back to that moment when success was there and you were riding it and everything was great, and then make them feel the impact it has had in the organization, the change that it has brought about. Go into dimensions. Say our water business did really well, but today we are finding it really hard to keep up with even clearing the stock at sales price. Once you've done that, you move into what exactly, when things change, circle number 2, what what is the exact problem that it creates for you? Obviously financial implication is one. What are the other problems that it creates for you? This is a very clear statement. When things change from that to that, it created a problem for us. The problem is this. Articulate the problem. You have to be very clear about what's the problem this story is going to solve. You can't just say it's a financial issue, our organization can't move forward. That's not going to do the work. You have to really be insightful about, make people go, I didn't even think that that's the problem that we're facing right now. I didn't have that much clarity. Your job as a storyteller is to really push people here. Once you've got that, you're going to move to circle number 3, and you're going to tell a story of how this problem is impacting the people in the organization. If you just make it an organizational problem, people are not going to give their blood, sweat, and tears to move the organization forward along with you. You're going to have to talk about how is that problem impacting the humans in the workforce? What is the impact on the people that work in this company? And in this, I want you to zoom into a small story and tell a story of an individual who is like many other people in the organization. Why am I telling you to zoom into an individual? Psychologists call this identifiable victim way. So you create an identifiable victim that everybody resonates with. Principle of movie making. Why is there one hero, not millions? Because when we watch that hero, we say, he's just like me or she is just like me. We resonate with the problems. So you zoom the story down to an individual, but just when people are listening to you and maybe saying, oh, that problem is just of Anand, or that problem is just, that's when you need to bring in the magnitude of the problem and establish the data around it and say, how big is this problem? You might have taken an individual and identified the problem with the individual, but it's actually a really large problem. And the effects of it are deeply rooted in the entire workforce. Only then, in circle 4, you tell them, so what are we going to do? What's the plan? How are we going to come out of it? What is the plan? most organizational leaders who respond and not tell stories jump straight to circle 4 and say, this is what we're going to do because we've been hit by COVID-19. You haven't even brought the people along, haven't even told them that this is not just about organizational growth. This is about bringing the people along and making their future safe too. Once you have then established the strategies of how you're going to respond to that problem, which solves the human problem, your employee problem here, it's time now for you to take them into the future and tell them that if we do this, if we follow this method, if we follow this act, what's the future story? Where are we going to be? What does it look like? This is the desire. This is the future story. This is the hope story. This is the story of progress. And this is the story of peer influence. What that means is you have to show them hope. Your hope can't just be fluffy words. Arne Sorensen gave hope to people, gave hope to married international employees, not by fuffing around. He said that we have early signs of recovery in China and manufacturing is coming back. And if that prevails and the trend continues, we will be there soon too. Your hope has to be credible, built on something. Then you talk about the progress. What do I mean by progress? What I mean is that it's not enough to once stand and tell a story. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow with what's happening with COVID-19. So you're going to have to constantly update on the progress, constantly evolve the story as things are evolving. And what is peer influence? People are really motivated by peer influence. When you are seeing some individuals in the organization really making a mark towards the forward story, you will actually tell that individual story, how they're contributing towards the larger agenda, which will make everyone else feel, I want to be like that person. I want to be that human who is now being acknowledged for the efforts that this person is demonstrating to take the organization forward. We are most influenced by people like us. And this forward story is a real opportunity for a leader to be able to create that peer influence. A forward story is a larger narrative which actually really sets the vision, the value, and an agenda for an entire generation to come. What is unusual about COVID-19 situation is that in the past, we could come up with a forward story and be rest assured that at least this will work for the next 4 to 5 months because change was not, uncertainty was not at this degree. The difference now is that the forward story evolves really quickly, changes very quickly. So every time the leader feels the change, senses the change, anticipates the change, predicts the change, they have to evolve the story along with them. So a quick recap of the 4 milestones that I covered with you. I started off by telling you the most powerful person on the planet is a storyteller. I then said to you that storytellers don't respond, they connect with a story. I then told you that storytellers in this digitally accelerated world are using the power of their voice because human connection, power of voice, and natural speak, not Franken speak, corporate speak, is what people are craving for. Then they show up. And then they use power of small moments to make business points. And then finally, when they sit down and they say, now it's my job to show these people the path forward post-COVID-19, they work on a narrative that is the forward story and share that with their people. I just want to conclude by saying that when times are tough, tough brands really get going by telling a story. I'll hand over back to Suresh.
Thank you, Anjali. Thank you for that presentation. We're just waiting for a few audience questions to come in, but before that, I have a few questions for you.
Sure.
Quite often the story that a leader needs to tell is a story of bad news, of layoffs, of downsizing, and there's no good way to actually tell a bad story, is there?
No. So actually, what we advocate is absolutely no sugarcoating. So the example of Arne Sorensen that I mentioned in the speech is the way his story is built in this 5-minute video that he presents is the best example I can give to any leader. he says, what is it like? When he says, what is it like? He says, no sugarcoating. He says exactly how it is. We are down in revenue. We're going to have these issues. This is how it is. Then he moves into, what's the effort? What are we going to do to shift this? And then when the effort with all our hands in it takes place, this is where we are going to be. So the second part of it, the effort and the future with that effort, is a really important component, quite often missed by leaders because they themselves feel so non-hopeful in that negative news that they forget to build the second part of it, which actually leads to a really bad outcome for the organization. So a negative news is not a story on its own. You can turn a negative news into, okay, no sugarcoating, effort, future.
Anjali, one of the assumptions you're making in this is that a lot of leaders and CEOs want to be open, want to be transparent, and want to be honest. But quite a few leaders don't want to be transparent. They want to be secretive, and they have things to hide and maybe insecurity. How does
Yeah,
this really work in that real world environment?
look, I think in a corporate world, one of the biggest stories that we are all fighting with always is, um, is my boss going to be happy? Are the shareholders going to be happy? And for those reasons, and is my job going to be secure? And for those reasons, those insecurities, the hiding aspect comes. But what we are learning is that if this crisis has taught us anything, it has taught us two things. It has taught us that the leader that survives and thrives is a vulnerable and an empathetic leader. Those are the two traits that have come out a lot. Now, if we are going to tie ourselves to the traditional ways of hiding and feeling those insecurities, then I'm sorry to say, but neither that leader nor that organization is going to is going to have the ability to be able to move forward. What I will add to this, though, Suresh, is that it's actually not even leaders' fault. The awareness to be able to do it differently and professionally and in a very sophisticated manner, that training and that skill to the leader does not exist. So they do what they've seen being done. The moment you bring best practices, the moment you show them examples from around the globe as to how people are doing it and teach them, give them a little push and path, they adapt to it. We see that repeatedly. So it's not the lack of the will, but in fact, it's the lack of the skill that repeats this negative behavior.
Okay, Harshika Kapoor, I think, asks a question. Could you give us an example of a moment from your personal life where telling a story or listening to a story helped you tide through a crisis?
Okay, so I'm not a prime minister of a country, so my crisis is a very different crisis. But you know what? I'll take you through something. So this was in 2015, and I was invited, not invited. I was asked to meet the president of this company called Bosch, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. And the Marcom team of Bosch had already made up their mind that they're going to work with me on creating brand value stories. So everything was set. And then just about 2 days before the program was going to happen, I was asked, could you come and meet the president? It's a formality. And they were very kind. They said, could you have lunch with him? And I said, oh, this sounds really lovely. I'll go and have lunch with him. So I walk into the meeting, lunch gets laid out, and the president says this to me. He says to me, I really don't like what you're talking about, and I don't think I want to go ahead and do storytelling because I think you're going to remove the creative flair of my people and box them into methods and structures and set ways of doing things. In that moment, I knew I have nothing to lose. This is already gone. So if there's one thing that I can do to turn this around is to actually teach this leader the power of stories. So I said, okay, if that's what you think, if you allow me, can I ask you a question? When was the last time you addressed your team? And he said, just this morning. I said, okay, where was it? And he said, oh, it was in the auditorium. I said, when you got up on the stage, what is the first thing you said? He said, I said, oh, hi, I'm really happy to be here. I said, oh, that's where you made the mistake. I want to tell you how real leaders do it. And in that moment, I shared a story of Tony Fernandez, CEO of AirAsia in Malaysia. And I told how he may didn't get up on the stage, how he repeatedly doesn't get up on the stage and just says what everyone hears all the time. He understands the point that he wants to make and tells a story around it. And the story he told in this occasion was how he brought the purpose of the organization, Dream the Impossible, to life. He tells a story about this girl from Thailand who got hired in AirAsia, and she was hired as a flight attendant. So he went to Thailand to welcome all the new employees. And this girl came up to Tony Fernandez and said, you know, I also have a dream. It's not to be a flight attendant, it's actually to be a pilot. And he looked around at her and said, sure, if you go and clear the exams and do everything, I will hire you as a pilot. This girl leaves that day, goes, studies whatever she has to study, then comes back 2 years later, calls Tony Fernandez and says, I'm ready. Do you remember me? Will you hire me as a pilot? He hires her as a pilot. And then this girl doesn't stop. Few months later, she calls him again, and many of you may be thinking, how is she calling a CEO? It's the culture of AirAsia where everyone has Tony Fernandez's mobile number. She calls him again, and she says, you know, every time I fly a plane, and a lot of passengers tell me I look really good. I want to compete in Miss Thailand contest and represent Thailand in Miss Universe. She goes and does that, ranks number 3 in Miss Universe contest. So Tony Fernandez says, you've always got to dream the impossible. Which other airline can say that Miss Universe is flying them around? Everyone can talk about great service, great food, great product. So what I learned in that moment was I can't give reasons for storytelling being good. I can't give knowledge around it. I can't give benefits. I have to attack this moment with a story. That was my little crisis.
Okay, one more question from Nidhi Naresh Netravalkar. She says some people believe in only letting their work speak. They might be introverted, they might be very talented, creative, or copy people, and they don't like telling stories. They just say, look at my work. Do you think lack of storytelling will affect people like that if they're put in leadership positions, for instance?
So Nidhi, this is more. I'm actually not surprised. A lady has asked this question, and if you're a young bubbling girl, I'm sorry to call you a lady. I just can't see you, Nidhi. This is a very typically woman question when it comes to storytelling. Put your head down, get your job done, and pray to Almighty Rama, Krishna, everybody that one day I'll get noticed. Um, I, I I think you have to be a good story catalyzer if you don't want to be a good storyteller. Storytelling requires for you to say and use your language, but there are some ways to be a good story catalyzer who actually catalyzes a story in an organization that people tell around. And that happens through not just doing good work, that happens through doing remarkable work. Remarkable work is not good work. It's work that is worth being remarked on. Doing something that is unusual. Go for difference, become remarkable, and your stories will be told if you don't want to be a storyteller. However, I'd love for you to contend with the idea of becoming a storyteller, Nidhi. Don't discount the power of it. You don't have to boast about yourself. There are many very sophisticated ways to be able to tell your story without having to do chest thumping.
All right, we have time for one more question, Anjali. And I'm going to take a question that says, yeah, an anonymous attendee who asks, somebody working for an NGO, how can forward stories be used to create impact and awareness?
Stories are not reliant on whether you're a corporate or whether you're an NGO. There's definitely not, they're not affected by that at all. Forward stories work. However, for an NGO, you're going to have to, rather than using finance, growth, all that kind of language, you're going to have to use the purpose language a lot more, because anybody who works in NGO does not work there for money. They work there for a purpose, something that ties them with it. I mean, if you're the anonymous person, if you're from India, I'm sure you saw Chapak, Deepika Padukone's recent movie, not that long ago, the movie that came out. That movie told us that anybody who works in a setup which is charity or NGOs and stuff like that, they are driven by the purpose. So your forward story is going to have to hook a lot on purpose and less on economic stability, less on financial growth, less on salaries and bonus. The language will have to completely shift.
Okay, Ramanathan asks, sometimes storytelling appears like an old wine in new bottle. Are people getting smarter to read through these narratives, and people feel saturated with so many stories being targeted at them? There's story fatigue. Anjali.
Yeah. So, Rama, that's a good question. Story fatigue only happens when you know you're telling a story. In a corporate setup, we ban the word story. We don't tell story like people would even know it's a story. That's long form storytelling. That's novels, that's fiction, that's hero's journey. That's the big adverts and commercials. I'm talking about day to day language, standing in the boardroom, show me results, make sure that your people are happy. That kind of constrained, tension filled environment. You don't tell a story like a story. When you finish telling a story, people say, I really get that point. I understand what he's trying to say. I feel like I want to move forward with it. They don't say, what a great storyteller. That's doesn't happen. And if you don't lead with that angle, then you never create a story fatigue, because what you're not trying to do is to create a Bollywood movie out there. What you're trying to do is to communicate using some principles of large storytelling, but telling small stories, tapping into the power of moments and really having a really large impact.
Any other recent examples, Sahiti asks, of this kind of forward storytelling that caught your attention? A couple of big brands around the world, or
Yeah, so I mean, I think Airbnb has done a really good job of setting up a forward story as to how they've gone back to their core business model, and that's how they were going to kind of bring the business back. Um, uh, I'm, as I mentioned, I'm a huge fan of how Marriott International Hotels, there are certain industries in this COVID-19 who are impacted more than the others, and hotels and airlines are certainly some of them. Virgin Atlantic also didn't do a bad job of it. So Marriott International Hotel. In fact, if any one of you is interested, I have decoded the entire forward story of Marriott International Hotels, delivered by Arne Sorensen on my website. It's www.narrative.com.sg. On the homepage, there is a booklet that takes you through every single word he said and why he said that, how intentional he has been. So Airbnb has done a good job. Virgin Atlantic has done a good job. And I would say Marriott International Hotels has done a good job. But I must also say to you, there might be many other companies who are doing a fabulous job. Forward stories are not for public display. They are for your own team to motivate them. The focus is inwards. So they might be doing a good job, just that we don't know. I'm talking about the ones that we know.
all right. Thank you, Anjali Sharma. And I know we have lots of questions, but we are running out of time. So please send us your questions on the event feed or tweet Anjali Sharma using the hashtag ZMelt, and we'll try and answer your questions offline or one-to-one. But that's all we have the time for in this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Suresh. You have a lovely rest of the day. And thank you, everyone who made the time to be here.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.